It was my husband's retirement party, the one we never got to have while he was alive. And my son-in-law stood up from the dinner table, straightened his jacket, and said, "Lorraine's name needs to come off the deed by the end of the month. The property in Muskoka belongs to us now. The assessment office puts it at just over $1 million, too." My daughter didn't look at me. She looked at her wine glass. I set down my fork, folded my hands in my lap, and said, "I see." And then I decided to let them believe they'd already won. My name is Lorraine. No, wait. Let me start over the way my husband taught me to start everything. With the truth, and from the beginning. My name is Cynthia Beaumont Walsh, and I am 69 years old, living in Kingston, Ontario, in the same house my husband Harold and I bought in 1991 for $212,000, which seemed like an impossible sum at the time, and which would make both of us laugh now, if he were still here to laugh with. Harold died 22 months ago. Pancreatic cancer. He was here in October, gone by February, and the space he left behind is not something I know how to describe to anyone who hasn't stood in it. If you're listening from somewhere across this country, drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this has traveled, and please stay with me until the end, because this story matters, and not just to me. The house on McIntyre Street sits on the corner lot with a Norway maple out front that Harold planted the year our daughter was born. The roots have buckled the sidewalk twice, and the city has sent notices both times, and both times Harold charmed the bylaw officer into giving us another season. I still don't know how. That was Harold. He could talk to anyone. To explain what happened, I have to go back to when I first understood who my son-in-law really was. Not when I met him. I liked him well enough then. Or told myself I did. I have to go back to the winter my daughter brought him home for Christmas, 3 years into their marriage, when Harold was already sick, and I was already exhausted, and my son-in-law sat at our kitchen table and asked Harold quite casually whether the Muskoka property was in both our names or just one. Harold looked at me across the table. I looked at Harold. Neither of us answered right away, and my son-in-law laughed and said, "Oh, I'm just asking for estate planning purposes. I work in real estate. I know how these things can get complicated." His name is Marcus. He is 41 years old, and he sells pre-construction condos in Ottawa, and he has very nice shoes and very little patience for people he considers beneath him, which includes, as far as I can tell, most of the people he knows. My daughter has been with him for 7 years. They married 4 years ago in a ceremony that cost $68,000, which I know because my daughter mentioned it at least a dozen times during the planning, and because I wrote a check for $15,000 of it. I was not unpleasant at the wedding. I smiled. I danced with Harold, who was not yet sick, or not yet diagnosed, which is a different thing. I sat at the table they'd assigned me, near the back, next to Harold's brother and a cousin of Marcus's who spent the evening telling me about a timeshare opportunity in Mexico. My daughter was radiant. I focused on that. The years of their marriage were a slow accumulation of small exclusions. Christmas at Marcus's parents in Ottawa, because the drive to Kingston was hard on him. Thanksgiving the same. Phone calls from my daughter that ended abruptly when Marcus came into the room. Visits to our house that stocked entirely in the last 18 months of Harold's life, when the driving was hard on everyone but particularly, apparently, on Marcus. He came to the funeral. He wore a beautiful suit and stood at the back and checked his phone twice during the eulogy. I noticed because I notice everything. That is, as it turns out, one of my most useful qualities. The months after Harold died were the kind of months you don't talk about in polite company. I kept the house. I kept the routines. I kept his coffee mug on the left side of the dish rack because that's where he always put it. My daughter called on Sundays briefly and always ended the call by saying, "Marcus says hi," which I knew meant Marcus was waiting for her. She visited twice. Both times she walked through the house with a particular expression of someone doing a property inspection, noting what had changed and what hadn't. I looked. To anyone passing, like a typical widow. Quiet, diminished, fading into the background of a life that had reorganized itself without her consent. I drove a 2014 Subaru with a dent in the bumper from a parking lot in Gananoque. I wore the same winter coat I'd had for 11 years. I brought my own bags to the grocery store and used the PC Optimum points I'd accumulated with a dedication Harold called my secret hobby. What no one knew. What I had decided, long ago and for very deliberate reasons, to keep private, was that I was none of those things. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The betrayal comes first. The dinner happened on a Saturday in late October. My daughter called 3 days before, her voice carrying that rehearsed lightness I'd learned to distrust. "Mom, Marcus and I would love to have you for dinner Saturday. We want to talk about some things. About the future. About making sure everything is, sorted." Sorted. I drove to their townhouse in the west end of Ottawa, arriving at 6 o'clock as asked, parking my dented Subaru on the street between a BMW and a Range Rover. Their place was immaculate in the way of homes that no one truly lives in. Everything in its place, throw pillows arranged with geometric precision, not a single item on the kitchen counter that suggested meals were actually cooked there. My daughter answered the door in a cashmere sweater and said, "Mom, you found parking okay?" As if the question meant something else. Marcus was in the kitchen, or said to be. I sat in the living room with a glass of Niagara Riesling I didn't ask for and wouldn't have chosen, and my daughter sat across from me and asked how the house was, how the neighbors were, whether I'd had the furnace serviced. I told her the furnace was fine. Marcus appeared with a charcuterie board that looked assembled by someone who'd watched too many Instagram reels, and they both settled across from me with the careful postures of people preparing to deliver a verdict they believe is generous. My daughter spoke first. "Mom, we've been thinking a lot about your situation." My situation, as if widowhood were a professional circumstance that required management. Marcus leaned forward. He had a folder on the side table that I hadn't noticed before. He opened it and slid a page across to me. "This is the McIntyre Street property. Current value, $890,000. And the Muskoka lot," he slid another page, "assessed at $430,000. Combined, you're sitting on nearly $1.5 million in real estate." I looked at the pages. I said yes. He continued. "The thing is, Cynthia, Ontario, probate can eat 12 to 15% of an estate's gross value in legal fees and taxes if assets aren't properly structured. Harold didn't have a will, did he?" Harold had a will. I didn't correct him. "Without proper planning," my daughter said, and I could hear Marcus's words coming out of her mouth like something memorized. "David could lose a significant portion of his inheritance to the courts." Her name is not David. I should clarify. She was speaking about what she and Marcus stood to lose. She slipped and said David, which is her brother who died at 23 in a car accident, and who has nothing to do with any of this, and she corrected herself immediately and moved on, and I sat very still and did not let my face change. The proposal came out in sections, like a document being read into evidence. The Kingston house should be transferred into a joint ownership arrangement immediately to avoid probate complications. The Muskoka property should go directly into Marcus's name. Since he understood real estate, he knew how to manage assets, and it made no sense for property to sit idle when it could be generating income. I should consider moving into a senior's residence, not a care home. They were very clear about this. Just an independent living community. There were several excellent ones in Kingston, one in Napanee that had recently won an award. And my finances should be consolidated and managed by Marcus, who had experience with investment portfolios and would make sure I was comfortable. He said comfortable the way people say it when they mean contained. I said, "What about what I want?" My daughter reached across and touched my hand. "Mom, this isn't about what you want right now. You're grieving. You're not seeing things clearly. Marcus and I love you, and we want to make sure you're protected. Protected? Marcus nodded. I looked at my daughter, who I had driven to ringette practice at 5:30 in the morning for 6 winters, who I had sat beside in a hospital waiting room for 11 hours when she had her appendix out at 14, who I had helped move 4 times and watched fall in love twice, and who I had never, not once, asked to be anything other than exactly who she was, and I watched her not meet my eyes. Marcus closed his folder with the satisfied sound of someone completing a transaction. He said, "We've already spoken to a property lawyer. The transfer documents are drafted. All they need is your signature and a commissioner of oaths. I can have someone at your house by Thursday." I sat in the dark in the guest room. He said there wasn't much time. The Muskoka property was sitting empty through winter, which was costly, and the Kingston market was moving, and the residents in Napanee had a unit available now but wouldn't hold it. My daughter said, "We're not trying to pressure you." Marcus said, "But we do need you to be reasonable." I picked up my coat. I said, "Thank you for dinner. I'll be in touch," and I left. I drove home through the October dark, through Napanee and past the turnoff for the residents I was apparently supposed to gratefully accept, and I did not cry. Not yet. Because I knew something they didn't, something I had been keeping in the way that you keep irreplaceable things. Not hidden exactly, just not offered up to people who haven't earned the knowing of it. Harold knew, Harold always knew, that was the marriage we had. I sat in Harold's chair that night, the wingback by the window that he'd reupholstered himself badly and refused to have redone because he was proud of it. And I thought about everything I'd been too deep in grief to examine clearly for the past 22 months. The question about the Muskoka property at Christmas dinner 3 years ago. The way Marcus had mentioned, casually at Harold's funeral reception, that he'd been researching Muskoka land values lately. The way my daughter had asked, 4 months after Harold died, whether I'd had any financial planning conversations with Harold's lawyer. I had attributed all of it to concern. People show care in clumsy ways. I had given the benefit of the doubt over and over, because that is what you do when you love someone and you want them to deserve it. But sitting in Harold's badly upholstered chair at 11 o'clock at night, with the Norway maple dropping the last of its leaves on the sidewalk outside, I understood that I had been watching the pieces arrange themselves into a picture I hadn't wanted to name. The next morning, I called my oldest friend, a woman named Heather, who has known me since we were in the same nursing program at Queen's in 1977, and who retired last year from 40 years as a nurse practitioner, and who is, as she would be the first to tell you, constitutionally incapable of being diplomatic when diplomacy serves no one. She arrived at 9 with Tim Hortons and a look on her face that said she'd been waiting for this call. I told her everything. The dinner, the documents already drafted, the commissioner of oaths standing by, the residents in Napanee with the waiting unit. She said, "Cynthia, I know. Can they actually do any of this?" I said in Ontario, an adult child can apply to become a guardian of property under the Substitute Decisions Act if they can demonstrate that the parent lacks capacity to manage finances. The threshold isn't as high as people think. Marcus is smart enough to build a case. I'm 69, widowed, living alone. He could claim I'm not maintaining the properties, making poor decisions, refusing reasonable support. A sympathetic judge without good representation on my side. But you're the sharpest person I know. Would Marcus's lawyer present me that way? Or would they present a grieving widow clinging to an empty house and a piece of Muskoka shoreline she can't manage? Heather drank her coffee. "What aren't you telling me?" I smiled. She knows me. "Harold and I didn't retire," I told her. "We stepped back from the work 3 years ago, but we didn't retire." "You always said he worked in insurance?" He was a founding partner of Walsh and Beaumont Financial Services. We established it in 1988. He managed the client relationships. I managed the portfolio strategy. We built it together over 31 years. Heather set down her coffee cup. We sold the firm in 2021 to a mid-size wealth management group out of Toronto. The sale was structured over 4 years. The final payment, $2.1 million, was due in November of this year, 11 days from the night of that dinner. She said my name very quietly. The Kingston house is assessed at $890. Independent appraisal I had done last spring puts it at 1.1. The Muskoka lot, which Marcus thinks is assessed at $430, I bought the adjacent parcel in 2019. Harold's idea said the price was ridiculous and we'd regret not taking it. That second parcel isn't in any assessment database Marcus would have thought to look at. Combined Muskoka holding, approximately $1.4 million. Heather was just looking at me. Their investment accounts, a family trust Harold established in 2015. 2 rental properties in Kingston, one on Bagot Street, one near the university on Union, that we've held since the late 90s and never mentioned to anyone because Harold said money talked loudest when it was quiet. How much? Total, counting the November payment and current market values, somewhere between $8 and $9 million. She started to laugh, not unkindly, the laugh of someone who has watched a chess game from the outside and only just understood which player has been thinking 6 moves ahead. Marcus, she said, thinks he's found a widow with $1.5 million in property. And a fixed income and no other resources, yes. She reached across the table and took my hand. Oh, this is going to be something. But first I told her, I have to make sure everything is protected, because right now it isn't, not legally, not the way it needs to be. That afternoon, I opened the fire safe Harold had installed in the back of the upstairs closet and spread 40 years of documents across the dining room table. I had not looked at most of them since February. Grief is a fog that makes paperwork feel obscene. But I could not afford the fog anymore. Partnership agreement for Walsh and Beaumont Financial Services, dated April 14, 1988. Sale agreement dated March 1, 2021, total consideration $8.4 million, payable in 4 installments. Bank records confirming 3 payments received. Title to the McIntyre Street property. Title to the Bagot Street rental, purchased 1997, current value approximately $700,000. Title to the Union Street rental, purchased 2001, current value approximately $650,000. Title to Lot 14 on the Muskoka parcel. Title to the adjacent Lot 15, purchased 2019. Harold's life insurance paid out in June, $1.2 million, reinvested in a GIC ladder. Investment accounts at TD and at Manulife. The family trust document. I photographed everything. Uploaded it to an encrypted cloud account. Put physical copies in a safety deposit box at the CIBC branch on Princess Street the following morning. Then I made my list. I called the seniors' residence in Napanee and asked whether someone had placed a hold on a unit in my name. The cheerful woman on the phone confirmed that yes, a Marcus Doyle had called the previous week and placed a non-refundable hold of $300 on a ground floor studio. Non-refundable. His credit card. I thanked her and hung up. I called the property lawyer whose name appeared on the draft transfer documents my daughter had left on the table when I wasn't looking. I palmed it without anyone noticing, which is a habit from 40 years of reading fine print quickly. The lawyer's receptionist confirmed that yes, a file had been opened for a property transfer on behalf of Marcus and my daughter, and that they were waiting on the client's, meaning my, signature. The client. I added another note to my list. I drove to the hospital where my daughter works. She's a pharmacist, has been for 16 years, at the Kingston Health Sciences Center, and waited in the parking structure until her lunch break. She came out at 12:15 and stopped when she saw me. Mom, what are you doing here? I wanted to talk to you without Marcus. Her face did something complicated. Mom, we already talked Saturday. Did we? I asked. Or did Marcus talk, and you sat beside him? She didn't answer. I took a step closer. I said, "Do you remember what you told me when you were 14 and that girl at school was telling everyone you'd stolen her boyfriend? You said, 'Mom, I need you to believe me before you need proof, because by the time there's proof, it'll be too late for the believing to matter.' Do you remember that?" She was quiet. "I believe you love me. I do, but I need you to tell me, right now, without Marcus in the room, is this what you want? Not what he wants, not what makes sense on paper. What you actually want." She looked at the parking structure ceiling for a long moment. She said, "I just want you to be safe." I said, "I am safe. I am 69 years old and I am safe in my house with my routines and my friends, and I do not need to be relocated to Napanee to prove it." She said, "Marcus says." I held up my hand. Gently, I said, "Give me 2 weeks. Before anything legal, before anyone signs anything. 2 weeks." She agreed, reluctantly, in the way of someone who had to go back and explain the delay to someone who wouldn't like it. I drove directly from the hospital to the office of a lawyer named Annette Tran, who practices elder law in Kingston and who had been recommended to me by Harold's estate lawyer, whose name I had never given to Marcus or my daughter because it was not their business. Annette Tran was 54, Vietnamese-Canadian, and had a reputation, as her assistant put it when I called to make the appointment, for being extremely thorough. "Sit down and tell me everything," she said when I walked in. I did. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What you've described is a textbook pattern of elder financial abuse. The isolation. Your daughter hasn't brought you into family decisions in years. The artificial urgency. Documents already drafted, deposits already placed, a timeline imposed without your consent. The infantilization. You're not thinking clearly. You're not seeing things straight. You need to be managed. These are not the actions of people trying to protect you. These are the actions of people who have already decided the outcome and are working backwards. Can they get guardianship of property?" She tilted her head. "Possibly. The Substitute Decisions Act allows it if they can demonstrate incapacity. But you're going to make that case very difficult for them. First, we establish an irrevocable trust today, if possible. Everything significant goes into it with me as trustee. Even if a court somehow granted Marcus guardianship over you personally, he could not touch trust assets without a separate proceeding that would take years and that we would fight at every stage. Second, I want you to see Dr. Patricia Webb. She's the leading geriatric assessment specialist in this region, for a comprehensive capacity evaluation. We want her opinion on paper, notarized, ready for any court. Third, and this starts immediately, you record everything. Ontario is a one-party consent province. Any conversation you're party to, you can record. Every call, every visit, every pressure tactic. We build the record from here." She slid a small digital recorder across the desk. I picked it up. "And if they push it to court anyway? Then we show a judge who you are. A woman who co-founded and co-led a wealth management firm for 31 years, who managed millions of dollars in client assets, who maintained complex financial records across multiple entities and jurisdictions, who has run her own household finances with precision for 4 decades. And we show them what this actually is." Annette's voice was very level. "Financial elder abuse is a crime in Ontario under the Criminal Code. Fraud, theft, and breach of trust provisions all apply. The recordings, the premeditation, the deposits placed before they'd even spoken to you, the drafted documents, the artificial timeline. We would have more than enough." I left her office with a plan and a recorder, and something I had not felt in nearly 2 years. Clarity. The capacity assessment took 4 hours. Dr. Webb was methodical and unhurried and asked me questions ranging from what day it was to how I would respond to an unsolicited investment offer promising guaranteed 12% annual returns. I told her I would decline and likely report it to the OSC, since no legitimate product can guarantee returns at that level, and if someone was making the claim, they were either misinformed or fraudulent. She made a note and smiled. Her written report, issued 4 days later, stated that I demonstrated cognitive function in the 97th percentile for my age cohort, expert-level financial literacy, excellent judgment and memory, and no indicators whatsoever of diminished capacity. She wrote that she would be prepared to testify to this opinion in any proceeding. On a Sunday afternoon, my daughter called. I put her on speaker and pressed record. She said Marcus thought it would be helpful if I signed a temporary power of attorney, just while the transition was being sorted out, just so someone responsible could manage things if anything happened. I said, do you know what's in my TD investment account right now? She said, Mom, that's not the point. I said the current balance is $422,000. The Manulife account holds another $608,000. I rebalanced both portfolios 6 weeks ago in response to interest rate movements, shifting 30% out of bond funds and into short-duration GICs. I can walk you through the reasoning if you'd like. Silence. I said, I am not confused about my finances. I am not a woman who needs a handler. I am a woman who has managed more money than you and Marcus have ever seen, and I have done it carefully and well for a very long time. Her voice changed. It went quieter and younger somehow, the way it used to when she was a teenager and knew she'd said something she couldn't take back. She said, Marcus is going to be very upset that you called the property lawyer. I said, and Marcus does not have authority over who I call. She said, I'm trying to help you. I said in the dark night, I knew you believed that. She hung up. I sat in the recording and sat in Harold's chair for a long time without moving. 11 days after the dinner in Ottawa, at 9:17 in the morning, my phone showed a notification from TD EasyWeb. Deposit received, $2,100,000. Final payment, Walsh and Beaumont acquisition. I called Annette. It's in. Then we're ready. Call them. A meeting, your daughter and Marcus, at my office, whatever day works. Tell them you've been thinking and you want to discuss the properties. Give them nothing else. My daughter said they'd come Thursday. I arrived early, as I always do. Annette's conference room looked over the Cataraqui River, bare willows along the bank, the city going about its November business on the other side of the glass. There were folders on the table. Annette had arranged them in a specific sequence. She'd explained each one to me the day before. Marcus and my daughter arrived together, Marcus carrying his own leather portfolio and wearing the expression of a man arriving to accept a prize. My daughter was dressed carefully and stood close to him and did not meet my eyes when she said, Hi, Mom. Are you doing okay? I said in the dark night that. I said in the queue for coming. I offered coffee, which Marcus declined. Annette opened the meeting. She said Dorothy had asked for this gathering because she wanted to make sure everyone had complete and accurate information before any decisions were made. My daughter said, Of course, that's all we've ever wanted. Marcus said, Absolutely. He unzipped his portfolio. I said, Before we get to the properties, I want to make sure we're all working from the same picture. Can you tell me what you understand about my financial situation? Both of you. What you think I have. My daughter frowned slightly. Mom, we've been over. I said, and humor me. What do you think Harold did for a living? Marcus said, Insurance. Fairly senior position as I understood it. Comfortable income. And me? My daughter said, You were at home mostly. You did the books for Harold sometimes, didn't you? Administrative work. I looked at Annette. She looked at me. I said Harold was a founding partner of Walsh and Beaumont Financial Services, a boutique firm we established in 1988, specializing in portfolio management for high net worth clients. I was the other founding partner. I served as Chief Investment Officer for 31 years. Harold managed relationships. I managed money. It was an equal partnership from the first day to the last. Marcus's pen stopped moving. We sold the firm 3 years ago to a wealth management group based in Toronto. The total purchase price was $8.4 million, structured in 4 annual payments. The final payment arrived in my account 11 days ago. My daughter said, "What?" Annette slid the first folder across the table. The partnership agreement, the sale documents, 3 bank statements showing the first 3 payments and the fourth. $2.1 million, I said, received November 4th. Total acquisition proceeds, $8.4 million. Marcus reached for the folder. His hands were steady, but I watched his jaw tighten as he read. My daughter said, "Dad never told me. He never said anything." I said we made a deliberate decision when you were growing up, not to raise you inside the wealth. We'd seen what that did to the children of our clients. We wanted you to build your own life, your own confidence, your own relationship with work. So we lived as we lived. We drove practical cars. We used the grocery loyalty program. We did not put our names in financial columns. She stopped. She tried again. "Why didn't you tell me after Dad died?" I said because I was grieving, and because I wasn't sure yet who was asking. Marcus set the folder down. His voice was very controlled. He said, "This is all very interesting, but it doesn't change the basic concerns we raised. You're still alone. The properties still need management. The estate still needs planning." Annette opened the second folder. She read from Dr. Webb's assessment. She read the percentile scores and the conclusions and the sentence that said in the specialist's professional opinion, I was more capable of complex financial decision-making than the majority of individuals she had assessed in 3 decades of practice. She set the report down and said any attempt to seek guardianship of property on the grounds of incapacity would fail. Decisively. Marcus said, "No one mentioned guardianship." Annette opened the third folder. She slid a transcript across the table. She said, October 26th, Marcus Doyle to Cynthia Walsh. Quote, "If you're not willing to be reasonable about this, we'll have no choice but to look at our options under the Substitute Decisions Act, and a judge will make these decisions whether you cooperate or not." End quote. The room was very quiet. My daughter turned to look at him. He said that was taken out of context. Annette opened the fourth folder, the full recording transcript, 53 pages, color-coded. She said, "We have recordings of every relevant conversation since October 25th. Ontario one-party consent. We have the transfer documents Marcus commissioned before the dinner in Ottawa. We have confirmation from the residents in Napanee that a hold was placed on the unit in my client's name without her knowledge or consent, paid for by Marcus Doyle on October 19th, 6 days before the dinner where this was supposedly first raised as a suggestion. We have communication records between Marcus and the property lawyer that predate by 2 weeks any conversation with my client." My daughter made a sound I hadn't heard from her since she was very small. She said, "Marcus." He said, "I was being proactive. I was trying to protect our future." She said, "You placed a deposit on a nursing home room for my mother before you'd talked to her. Before we'd talked to her. You told me we were going to have a conversation." He said, "We did have a conversation." She said, "You told me she needed help, and I believed you." She turned to me, and her face had changed into something I recognized from a long time ago. She said, "Mom, I didn't know about the deposits. I didn't know he'd already called the lawyer. He told me you'd been struggling and that we needed to act before things got worse. I said, I know. I don't know if that's enough." I said in the disn't, "Not yet, but it's where we start." Annette opened the fifth folder. She explained the irrevocable trust, established the previous week, assets transferred, her own name as trustee. She explained that even in the theoretical scenario in which any court granted anyone guardianship over me personally, the trust assets were beyond reach. She explained the complaint she was prepared to file with the Law Society of Ontario regarding a lawyer who had drafted documents at a client's direction intended to transfer property from a capable adult without that adult's informed and uncoerced consent. She explained that criminal provisions under the criminal code pertaining to fraud and breach of trust were available, and that the evidence assembled would support a referral to the Kingston police if that was the direction we chose. Marcus said, "This is an overreaction." Annette said, "The $300 non-refundable hold on the nursing home room suggests otherwise." I said, "Here is what is going to happen." I addressed them both, but I looked at Marcus. "You will withdraw from all involvement in my financial affairs. Every document you have drafted or commissioned related to my property or estate will be destroyed. The hold in Napanee will be released. You will have no further contact with my lawyer, my accountant, or any financial institution I hold accounts with. You will not contact me directly for a period of 60 days. My daughter said, "Mom, I said to you, I am offering something different. I am offering time and the chance to choose who you want to be in this, but I cannot have you carry his decisions into my life. If you want a relationship with me, it will have to be one you build on your own terms, not his." Marcus stood. He said, "You're going to regret this." I said, "I don't think I am." He left. The door closed behind him with a sound that was smaller than I expected. My daughter sat at the table for a long time. She was crying quietly in the way of someone who has just seen something they cannot unsee. She said, "I'm so sorry." I said, "I know." She said, "I don't know what I'm going to do." I said, "And I think you do. I think that's why you're crying." She left 20 minutes later. She hugged me at the door, hard and long, the way she used to when she was small and had been frightened. I held on. That was 8 months ago. I'm sitting on the back porch in June, drinking coffee in the morning light, watching the garden Harold planted 20 years ago, and which I have kept going because some things you keep going, not from obligation, but from love. The peonies are out. He always loved the peonies. My daughter separated from Marcus in December. The process was not clean or simple, and I did not interfere and did not celebrate and called her every Sunday and let her lead the conversation wherever she needed it to go. She is living in a rented apartment in the Strathcona neighborhood now, and has started running again, which she hadn't done in years. And she called me last month to say she'd signed up for the Kingston road races in the fall. And could I come watch? I said I wouldn't miss it. We have Sunday calls again. Long ones. She asks about the garden, and I ask about her friends, and neither of us mentions Marcus unless she brings him up, which she does sometimes, with the particular tone of someone still sorting through debris but no longer drowning in it. The house on McIntyre Street is still mine. I had the kitchen updated this past winter, not because it needed it, but because I wanted it, because it is my house and I am allowed to want things for it. The Norway maple out front is leafing out beautifully and the sidewalk is buckled again, and I have written a very polite letter to the city explaining that the tree has stood there for 36 years and I intend to keep it, and we'll see what they say. I spend January and February in Victoria now, in a small apartment I bought 2 blocks from the ocean. Heather comes for 3 weeks every year, and we walk on the waterfront and eat dinner at unreasonable hours and behave, she says, like the graduate students we once were, and never quite got to be. 6 weeks ago, I established the Harold Walsh Elder Rights Fund in partnership with a Kingston legal clinic. We provide legal assistance to older adults facing financial abuse, help fund capacity assessments in contested guardianship proceedings, and support community organizations working to identify and respond to elder fraud. Last month, we helped a 77-year-old man in Belleville whose son had forged his signature on a property transfer and sold a house the father had lived in for 40 years. We got him a lawyer, supported the police complaint, and helped him establish a legal residence while the matter worked through the courts. He called me when the son was charged. He said, "I thought nobody would believe me." I said in the bit, "We believed you? That's what we're here for?" There is a woman I know now, met through the legal clinic, who is 63 and whose daughter took $40,000 from a joint account over 18 months by increments small enough not to trigger bank alerts. She didn't tell anyone for 2 years because she was ashamed, and because she loved her daughter, and because she kept thinking it must be a misunderstanding. She is through the misunderstanding now. She comes to a monthly coffee I host for women navigating financial recovery, and she is, I think, becoming someone who will help other people through this same fog. I see it in the way she listens when someone new comes in and is still in the shame of it. She does not flinch, and she does not look away. I heard recently, through someone who knows someone at her firm, that Marcus has a new listing for a pre-construction development outside Gatineau, a very large project, apparently, a considerable commission at stake. He is, by all reports, doing fine, continuing to be exactly who he is. I hope for very little from that direction, but I have learned this year that hope is a practice and not a destination, and I can afford to be generous with the allocation of it. This morning, Heather is coming at 10, and we are going to walk down to the lake and watch the rowers go out and drink coffee from a thermos and argue about which of our mutual acquaintances has aged best. A conversation we have been having for 40 years and will probably have for 40 more, God willing. Last night, I sat in Harold's chair and wrote in the journal I've kept since February of the year he died. The early pages are almost unreadable. The recent ones are steadier. Last night, I wrote this. I have spent 69 years learning what I am made of, and most of the knowledge came from the difficult parts. The part where Harold died and I had to become someone who could live without him. The part where my own daughter, without fully understanding what she was doing, came close to taking everything we had built. The part where I had to choose, clearly and without the comfort of ambiguity, to stand in my own life and say, no, not this, not you, not now. Harold used to say that the most undervalued asset in any portfolio is patience. The willingness to hold something that has real value even when the market is telling you to panic and sell. I held. I am still here, in my house, in my city, in my life. The peonies are blooming. The coffee is French press because that's how Harold made it, and I see no reason to change what is already right. And if there is another woman somewhere tonight, sitting in her husband's chair, wondering if she's allowed to fight back, I want her to know that she is. I want her to know that age is not surrender, and grief is not incompetence, and the people who love you do not arrive with notarized documents. My name is Cynthia Beaumont Walsh. I am 69 years old. I built something. I protected it. And I am not finished. I keep thinking about the moment Marcus set that folder on the table, the one with my name on it, the documents he'd commissioned before he'd ever asked me a single question. There's something clarifying about seeing your own life treated as a transaction. It doesn't feel the way you'd expect. It doesn't feel like rage. It feels very still, the way the lake goes still, just before a storm comes through. What I've come to understand, sitting with all of it over these past months, is that what happened to me followed a logic that had nothing to do with luck. Marcus believed I was someone who could be managed because I had given him no reason to think otherwise. I drove an old car. I clipped grocery coupons. I wore the same coat for 11 winters. I had chosen, deliberately and for good reasons, to live without display. And he looked at that and saw weakness. He saw a woman who had already been diminished by grief, and he made the calculation that diminished people don't fight back. He was wrong about the weakness, but I'll be honest with you, he wasn't entirely wrong about the grief. For nearly 2 years after Harold died, I was not fully myself, not incompetent, not confused, but not all the way present either. Grief does that. It takes up the space where your sharpest instincts usually live. And the people who moved against me chose that window very carefully. That's the part I want other women to sit with. The timing was not accidental. What protected me in the end was not the money. The money mattered, yes. It gave me options. It gave me a net. It gave me the capacity to fight on equal footing. But what actually saved me was something I had spent 40 years building quietly alongside Harold, and it had nothing to do with the investment accounts. It was the habit of paying attention, of reading the fine print, of noticing the question at Christmas dinner 3 years ago and filing it away without reacting, of understanding that the most valuable thing you can do when someone underestimates you is to let them continue doing it, right up until the moment you're ready. My daughter made choices I will not defend. But she also, when it came to the moment that mattered, heard the truth and turned toward it instead of away. That took something real. It takes a particular kind of honesty to sit across from the person you've been loyal to and say, I was wrong about what I was loyal to. She is doing the hard work of that now. I watch her and I see someone becoming more fully herself, and I think that is the only meaningful outcome of any of this. And Heather, who has known me since we were 22 and has never once pretended I was less than I am, showed up with coffee and did not waste a single word on false comfort. That is what real friendship looks like. Not the version that tells you everything is fine. The version that says, okay, what are we going to do? I am 69 years old. I have outlasted a 31-year business, a 40-year marriage, a grief that I thought might be permanent, and a son-in-law who thought he'd already won. None of that happened by accident. It happened because Harold and I believed from the very beginning that integrity was not something you performed for an audience. You practiced it when no one was watching, in the decisions that never made the news, in the years of showing up and doing the work correctly, even when cutting corners, would have been easier and no one would have known. That is what I want to leave you with. Not a list of steps, not a strategy, just this. The life you build honestly, quietly, and with genuine care for what is right. That life does not disappear when someone tries to take it from you. It turns out to be exactly what you need when the moment comes to stand your ground. I'm still here. The peonies are blooming. Harold would have been pleased.